Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're talking to you from the Western Galilee in the north of Israel. It's Wednesday evening, and a lot's been going on. This is our first podcast of Israel's slippery slope, and we want to thank you all for joining us. With me in the studio is Ron Ziv. Good to have you with us. And we're going to have a special guest in a few minutes. But in the meantime, we're going to start telling you about ourselves. So very simply, Ron and I both come from Los Angeles. We were both in the socialist Zionist youth movement called Hashemeret Tza'ir. And we both made Aliyah. We came to live in Israel in the 1970s. And that's enough for now. We'll be getting more into detail in our next programs. This is a series. So let's let Ron introduce himself. Ron, go for it.
Yeah, first of all, a great pleasure to be co-piloting here with Mighty Moshe. And I just wanted to, again, as Moshe mentioned, made Aliyah in the early 70s, married 3 kids, helped start a new kibbutz overlooking the Dead Sea, returned back to the Western Galilee, and a whole bunch of stuff between that. And we're not going to get into any details. We'll do that later. And let's get on with it.
Sure. So I'll also introduce myself a bit. I made Aliyah and I came to live in Israel in 1974. I came after Ron. I'm married and have 5 kids. I also started a young kibbutz in the northern Negev desert of Israel called Kibbutz Kramim, and very proud of that. And in addition to that, after that, that is, my wife and I returned to the Western Galilee, and we'll go into more details about us later, but that's not the point. So how about if both of us right now talk about the podcast itself and what we're going to be doing? You want to start?
Sure. First of all, we're speaking in English, as you've noticed, with no Hebrew subtitles. We want to make sure that all of you in the English-speaking world can hear us loud and clear. And we've called this podcast a slippery slope because that is exactly what Israel is going through at the moment. We're sliding into a fascist theocracy at the moment, and we want to ask essentially for your help in making sure that you make sure that your representatives, Congress, senators, whatever they may be, wherever they may be,
and in the rest of the world also, your elected officials,
to make sure that they make their voices loud and clear.
To the Israeli government.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that we decided to do this podcast a while back. And since then, things have gone from bad to worse.
Chaos, real chaos that is usually accompanying fascism in its various stages.
So we're here. We want to make the message loud and clear. And hopefully you'll be following us. We'll give you the current events as they're unfolding here in Israel. And jokingly, I say a lot of times, it's as if, until they knock on the door and they shut us down, because that's what they do. Oh my God.
Unfortunately, this is not a laughing matter. This is a very, very serious situation for Israeli democracy, which I also contend will endanger American democracy. We want you to know that our main purpose is to bring you current events and our analysis and commentary on those events to keep you updated. This may be a weekly podcast. It may be one day after another if there are too many and unbelievable occurrences happening in Israel. What we won't be talking about for the next 5 weeks, which is the period we're going to discuss in a couple seconds, we are not going to be talking about the occupation, although if there were a button here in our studio, Ron and I would both press the button to finish the occupation today. We're not going to be talking about all of the faults of Israel, including the racism against Ethiopian Jews, against the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel. We're not going to be getting into almost anything else except this legislative blitz and the assault on the judiciary, which is intended to castrate the judiciary. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. We're going to have a special guest for you soon, but let me first say thank you to Adar Weinreb for giving us the opportunity to broadcast on his Sulcha channel. And we're going to give you more information about how you should subscribe to the channel to be able to find out when we're broadcasting. You can watch our broadcasts also in the recorded manner. So, unfortunately, let's start talking about how we came to slide. Well, Ron, go ahead. What led up to this, in other words?
Yeah, well, first of all, before we even start on that, because Moshe and I are kind of new at this, we're sliding in between Hebrew and English. So apologies for sometimes when we lose our English and.
What's the word?
What's the word in Hebrew? Okay.
We've been here too long.
Way too long. What happened is after the election, when the Likud got the ability to form a government, and Benjamin Netanyahu, whose main concern is to make sure that he doesn't go to trial, then what he did is he put together a coalition of fanatics. And those of you who are following the news in Israel can see and hear what is going on now in Israel, which is a catastrophe. So
it's regime change in a democratic manner. Have you ever seen that happen anywhere else? Like, let's say in the 1930s in other countries? Won't say which.
And so under the guise of democracy, we're seeing Israel slipping down that slope into that theocracy, and we're very, very, very anxious about it.
So this was one of the first things that happened after they came. Well, let's make it a quick reference to what really happened the first day of the government. Our Minister for National Security, used to be just security, National Security, decided to make a visit to the Temple Mount without being invited. Totally a step of what's the word? Here we are. What's the word I'm thinking of? Provocation to the Palestinians and to the Muslims of the world. That's the idea of this government. They're going to be in our face for a long time. But then they started to pass laws. So this is the first one. Tell us about it, Ron.
The law that we're speaking about now is first of all, I want to say that the Temple Mount on calm days is a volatile place
for the world.
Absolutely. Jerusalem, as you know, is the center for major religions, and we have to really we have to make sure that we keep things calm. So what's happened is that they have begun a blitz of legislation in order to make sure, first of all, that Benjamin Netanyahu does not go to trial, and if he does go to trial, to make sure that the judges that are judging him are people that he himself has chosen. Imagine that.
So he's going to stack the Supreme Court, and he's also going to castrate it so that they almost will never have the ability to really override anything that he or his government pass. But should it come to that, they got their people. Did you notice that happen in the United States? I think it happened also in the United States with President Trump. So go ahead.
And there's a few examples of that in Turkey, Hungary, Poland, where through democracy these things have come to pass. One of the bills that they're passing at the moment, and we'll talk about it in a moment, is this bill of making sure that Aryeh Deri, who is the head of the Shas, ultra-religious Orthodox community, make sure that he gets back into court after the Supreme Court told him, no, you are a convicted felon, and we are not going to allow you to be in the government, certainly not being close to anything that having to do with money.
Yeah. An ex-con being given a position as a minister from the region that he stole from. Unbelievable.
So the Supreme Court essentially said, no, you cannot be a minister in Netanyahu's government. And they essentially decided, well, no, we're going to blow them off, and we're going to decide that we're going to make a special law just for him.
Well, what happened was the first day was a shock to all of us. And then, as you see in this picture, about 70,000 people, including Ron and myself, came to protest in Jerusalem to say, no, we're not going to let this kind of thing happen. 70,000 people. Let me mention at this point, for the last 7 weeks in Israel, there were over 100,000 people every week at a demonstration. And I'm not talking about all of the rest of the small demonstrations with tens of thousands of people during the week, but the one weekly main demonstration had over 100,000 people. Just this last Saturday, there were 160,000 people at a demonstration. Let's get that into American proportions for you. 100,000 people at a demonstration in Israel, a country of 9,500,000 or 600,000 people, is the equivalent of having in the United States 3,526,000 people demonstrating every week for the last 6 weeks. It would be top news almost every day, every week, and it's not being heard in America probably very much. It's also not being highlighted in Europe or almost in any of the international channels. So after that demonstration, that was the day that the first one was passed. The next day, this is what happened. You want to tell us about it, Ron?
Yeah, the first law is that they passed. You can see these are the 5 laws that they passed. It's important to note.
One day. 5 laws in one day.
5 laws in one day. First reading. In Israel, you need 3 readings to make it into proper law, but they're moving right ahead. The first law is to make sure that anything that happens in the police, today there's a separate department that handles any kind of misconduct, alleged misconduct by the police. They decided, no, we're not going to have that. We're going to have the minister of justice. He will be the one that will judge whether the police should fall under
his auspices.
Under his auspices.
And by coincidence, who is the Minister of Justice? He right now is the guy who's pushing this legislative blitz that they have promised will end in 6 weeks. They will get all of their legislation through in 6 weeks. He's pretty much the practicing prime minister right now. So that's pretty horrific. Then came the second law called Dairy Law Number 2, because there's already been a Dairy Law Number 1. Mr. Dairy was told that he has to leave government.
Right, this is what we spoke of with the last slide that you saw.
Right, so this time he was again appointed by Netanyahu. The Supreme Court stepped in and said, nope, you can't do that. Now they've passed the law. The next day after we were at the Knesset demonstration, they passed a law to override that, to give Dairy the right to be again a minister. And there are other convicts in this government. He's not the only one. But let's move on. The third one, Ron, take it.
Yeah, the override law. Essentially, what they say. Well, let me show you an example. Let's say that the Israeli Parliament, the Knesset, passes a law. It goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court votes it down and says, judicially, no, this is a discriminatory law. Let's say, for example, against the LGBTQ community, and they say, no, you cannot do this against the LGBTQ community. And what happens is the parliament, the Knesset, can override what the Israeli judges have said, and by just a simple majority, that's all they have to do. And in Israel, a majority is 61 seats out of the 120. So if they have 61, they can override what the Supreme Court says, and it's just horrendous to think that really they are totally castrating the whole Supreme Court. The fourth law, which some of you will just be kind of bewildered at, because we certainly are bewildered by it. It's called the Not Kosher for Passover law. It essentially means that in hospitals, the hospital administration can decide whether during Pesach, Passover, you can bring non-kosher food inside of the hospital. Now, Moshe and I, we live in the Western Galilee. The majority of people in the hospital adjoining our communities are non-Jewish people, and essentially the administration can say, okay, we've decided we're not going to go for this kosher rule, and you can really bring in any kind of food into the hospital. The only thing is that the hospitals need very much the support of the Ministry of Health, and have to make sure that they get those funds. So they're actually being sort of blackmailed into this horrendous Passover law. Moshe, the fifth law.
Right. The fifth law is called the fifth law is in essence expanding the authority of the rabbinical courts to be able to take cases that used to be limited only to the civil courts. So in essence, what we're looking at in the laws 4 and 5, we're looking at a strengthening of the theocracy in Israel. Right. We're turning this into theocracy. There was also a law that was passed to turn the entire Western Wall Plaza into like a synagogue, an Orthodox synagogue. So any of you out there who are not Orthodox Jews would have to now comply with Orthodox dress laws. You wouldn't be allowed to play any musical instrument. Crazy stuff, dress codes, everything. So all of these would be punishable by prison. So let's move on and let's talk about what this whole atmosphere of this really, how should we call it, extremist regime is affecting the public. So for instance, the day that we were in Jerusalem, a cafe owner in Petah Tikva near Tel Aviv closed his cafe to come to the demonstrations in Jerusalem. And when he came back the next morning and opened up the cafe, someone had slipped this page under his front door. The symbol that you're seeing is the Kahana Jewish Defense League logo. And it is a warning in Hebrew saying anybody who closes down their businesses to go to Jerusalem and protest against the government, we won't be buying from him. So this is not just someone standing in front and boycotting. This is somebody who's actually threatening this guy. It's another thing altogether. Now, as if that wasn't bad enough, just yesterday, in a West Bank town called Hawara, following the murder of two Jewish men who passed through the town, young men, brothers. The two brothers were murdered by someone in Hawara or one of the neighboring villages. That evening, as you see in front of you, Jewish terrorists came into the town.
Vigilante terrorists.
That's correct. And it's Jewish terror. They went and they burned lots, they burned cars, parking lots, they burned homes. And the IDF had to escort people out of their burning homes and take them to safety. We're talking about not these 7 or 10 guys here. We're talking about hundreds of the Hilltop youth and some of the worst elements in Israeli society came in. And here's just to give you another idea of what happened there. There you go. I mean, terrible, terrible stuff. So I think we've talked enough about how horrific it is all getting. And these are all examples of what happens when fascism moves in. The crazies come out of the woodwork and they start really causing havoc. And what they're causing is a breakdown, not only of Israeli society, but some of them actually tried to run over some soldiers the other day. So what we're seeing is something where we're going into mayhem, into a real chaotic situation. So instead of me talking about it, what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring in a guest of ours, special guest, Major General Yair Golan. And let's welcome you into the studio with us. Welcome, Yair.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good to have you with us.
Good noon.
Yeah.
Or
tough times.
Or morning, I don't know.
Very difficult times. So let's try to get all of us into one screen here. Can we do that?
Yeah,
There we are.
good job.
Okay.
Hello.
So, Yair was among other things, he was the former assistant to the chief of staff of the IDF, and he was also a member of Knesset. But before that, he actually held a position as the leading officer in the West Bank. Yair, could you tell us a little about what your position was to explain to people how you've got a pretty good idea of what's going on and what was going on throughout the years? And then let's talk about that first. Please introduce yourself a little more in depth.
All right. During the years 2005, 2007, including the period of the disengagement, the implementation of the disengagement plan, I commanded Judea and Samaria for more than 2 years. That was a time of terrible terror attacks imposed by the Palestinians. And at the same time, I got a lot of experience confronting Jews, settlers who live in Judea and Samaria, unfortunately. I can tell you that what we see right now is a deterioration, a terrible deterioration in the willingness to obey the law. And what we see in Judea and Samaria 2 days ago, it's a kind of a chaos. And this is totally unacceptable. This is a terrible danger to our ability to live with each other. It's a terrible sign for the future, because in this case, hundreds of people managed to penetrate the village of Hawara and cause a terrible destruction. It was a kind of a Jewish pogrom, and I don't have to say much. You know, according to our history and our culture, what is for us to see such an event, Jews impose a pogrom on Arabs.
We might want to mention that this is not the first time that there has been Jewish violence and Jewish terror, but those have usually been what were referred to as price tag attacks. This is a full-fledged pogrom.
Yeah, this is but I don't remember any event like this that included so many participants, and this is a terrible sign for the future. And the meaning of that it's truly crucial in Israel to strengthen democracy and to strengthen the rule of law. There is no other way. And we are in a very sensitive period, and we need to do something drastic in order to regain this sense of democracy and this sense of the rule of law. And, you know, it's hard to imagine such a process heading by the current government. And therefore, if you're asking me, we are heading some sort of a non-violent civil revolt. In fact, I'm one of the persons who truly encourage such a civil revolt, because in case where the government itself attack the civilians and attack the freedom of civilians and attack the rule of law for civilians, that's totally unacceptable. And therefore, we need to fight.
I'd like to stop you here and just let people overseas know, because people overseas probably don't know, but ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at the one individual who, when he was still in uniform as the assistant chief of staff of the IDF, he spoke to a Holocaust memorial ceremony in 2016, and he warned that we might be coming to this day. He was the only person who had the guts to say it, and not only person, he was serving in the IDF. The country was appalled. They grilled him. They said, how dare you make any kind of comparisons to Holocaust or Germany or whatever. There was no reference to Holocaust. It was about the beginnings of fascism, and nobody understood him then. Well, I think everybody understands now what you were talking about. And I'd just like to ask if you can give us an idea of, you've mentioned civil revolt, and on the other hand, what you would expect to see from that kind of revolt of ours, and also where you see the country going. How do you see this playing out?
Americans call it civil disobedience.
Correct.
Well, there are three methods of civil disobedience. The first is to disobey, not following the rules, and do everything in order not to cooperate with the government. Everyone can do something in order to express his unwillingness to cooperate with the government. The second method are strikes, and we need to have as much as possible strikes all over the Israeli markets and economy in order to explain the government that you cannot move forward without us. The Israeli economy cannot move forward without us. And the third method is demonstrations. And we need to demonstrate every day from sunrise to sunset,
Yair,
over and over and over again.
Yeah, Yair,
Yes.
I wanted to ask you. There's a movement in Israel, and it's undeniable that there are many people in the reserves now who are saying, "I'm not going to serve under a fascist
government.
fascist government." You being a soldier most of your life with this incredible amount of experience, how do you see that?
I see it as a very positive measure. Yes, I encourage them because I think that without some drastic measures, this terrible government won't be able to understand the outrage of the people. And this is a very clear-cut sign that the most devoted citizens of Israel, those who serve as reserves, and this is a terrible, well, it's tough to be in the reserve corps, and I think that this is a clear sign that we are not willing to cooperate with a government which take us to some sort of fascism. Ladies, gentlemen,
Where are we going? Where's this going to lead to? We're sitting here and we're kind of like trying to, and it's kind of like the difference between optimists and pessimists. So I wanted to ask you, let's say if we go forward in a year from now or 2 years from now, where do you see this going?
Well, first we have in the next 6 weeks.
Well, we should be a bit modest. I have no ability to predict the future, for a year or two. Let's say that I can make my predictions for the next 3-4 weeks. And where are we heading? I think that if we will be able to be decisive enough, this government will take back the proposals to fixing the law, and they will negotiate with us. This is the most desirable outcome of this process. What we want is, talking without moving further with the judicial procedure.
So what you and Ron were talking about?
So freezing the judicial procedure. This is I would say, the basic outcome, which is needed in order to move forward in any positive direction.
But we should make it clear.
I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic I'm optimistic concerning that, because I think that Netanyahu, with all his willingness to get rid out of his judicial problems, he truly understands that without some sort of cooperation with from the civilians and from the opposition parties, he won't be able to move forward with his initiative, because we are so we were so
We have a majority of the Israeli public understanding and even supporting us.
No doubt, we have the majority, and I
I-
think I seen the demonstrations in the that more
In Tel
and
Aviv
more
and at the
people,
Knesset, yeah.
more and more people who identify themselves as Zionist religious or as members of the Likud party, show themselves in the streets.
I'd like to make two things clear.
This is fantastic, and this is fantastic.
Yeah, I'd like to make two things clear that possibly our viewers aren't aware of. Number one, in the Israeli governmental system, as opposed to the United States having three branches, you have the legislative, you have the judiciary, and you have the executive. Well, in Israel, our executive and our legislative are one branch. So we only have one other branch as the check to keep the whole thing in balance, and that's the judiciary. And what they're doing now is eliminating the judiciary. In essence, we're talking about an autocracy. That's why it's so important. This isn't just something which is happening on the side, like in the United States, where there's a battle between the Supreme Court being too right-wing or left-wing. This is getting rid of the last check in the balances. The other thing I wanted to make sure you can talk about, and you and Ron were speaking about this a minute ago, the people who are supporting us are lists of hundreds of combatant officers, pilots, members of the security systems and the security apparatus of the country.
The highest echelons.
Why do you think that's happening? And can you give us maybe a couple more examples?
Well, I would like to explain also why it's happening. What is the interest of Benjamin Netanyahu? It's 100% clear. He wants to get rid out of his judicial problems. But he got a total support from the ultra-Orthodox. Why? Because they want to expand their autonomy. They want to get more and more money in order to close the high fences around their society. You cannot do it without lessening the power of the Supreme Court, because this is a true sign of inequality concerning the rule of law. And the third and the most decisive force behind this judicial initiative, the judicial revolution, are the extreme religious Zionist parties. I don't consider themselves as Zionists, but that's the way they call themselves. And I would say that in this case, they need to lessen or to demolish the Supreme Court in order to do whatever they want in Judea and Samaria. This is the issue. And this is the true engine behind this negative process. And we need to understand that. For decades, they have no respect to the rule of law. For decades, I, have a lot of experience with them. They look at democracy as a kind of a mechanism, and they don't provide democracy any aspect of values. For them, it's just a mechanism to gain power. As long as this mechanism works, fantastic. The minute this mechanism works against them, they want to demolish him.
Before we finish, I should let other people, the people around the world know who aren't familiar, you were a member of Knesset in the previous Knesset for the Meretz Party. And unfortunately, the Meretz, excuse me?
For 3 consecutive Knesset.
Correct. But also in the very last, as in final Meretz party in the Knesset, because we have fallen out of the Knesset. We are not an official party anymore. This kind of leaves the left crippled. We are lacking in representation and lacking in getting our vision of how we want to come out of all of this. What is our alternative to the situation today and to the situation that's been existing since the beginning of occupation and everything else? Can you, in a very short way, just tell us, are you going to be part of being able to reassemble the left and make progress?
Well, I think it's absolutely crucial to rebuild the Zionist left in Israel. I insist to call it the Zionist left. We cannot give up Zionism. We are the true patriots of Israel. And therefore, we need to have this patriotic flag in our right hand and the equality and democracy on the left hand.
Let me cool some of our viewers down, because when you said Zionist, a bunch of them had what we call a knee-jerk reaction, said, oh, Zionists. No. I don't want to have it. When you say Zionism, I know what you're talking about. We should let them know that our Zionism has nothing to do with occupation. It has nothing to do with theocracy. It has nothing to do with a dictatorship. Our Zionism is something, there are many flavors of Zionism.
In fact, we hold the true meaning and the fundamental meaning of Zionism. You can read Theodor Herzl, Alt Neuland, he depicts in his book, this small book, the vision of Zionism for Israel. And I can assure you, this vision is about this utopia, is about a free, democratic, liberal state that treats its minorities in the most respectful manner, a state that works, hard in order to be a true partner in the region, and at the same time knows how to defend itself against certain enemies.
Excellent.
And I think what I try to bring to the Zionist left tomorrow morning is a kind of practical approach. We don't need any more, nice slogans. We need to be
real action and organization.
We need to be practical, and we are going together, me and Moshe, to establish a new movement, a leftist Zionist movement, in order to rebuild and in order to recover the Zionist left.
So I suggest that we first, at this point, thank you very much for your time. You're one of Israel's most busiest people, and everybody wants to hear from you. And I'm sure we'll go into more depth later on. We'll have you back as a guest in the future. So thank you very, very much, and have a good evening. And we're going to continue here and finish our broadcast.
Thank you, Yair. Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
Great stuff.
Wow. For those of you who don't understand, you were looking at possibly the future of Israel. We don't know how it's going to work out, but there are a lot of people out there who are looking for something that doesn't exist, hasn't existed in the previous elections. So, how about if we talk about the fact that this is only our first, it's not our last, it's not the only. We're going to be having more episodes, and we're also going to be bringing in other guests and discussing the current events that come along at the time. So we want to say thank you. We'll try to publicize as best we can in advance of what we're going to be talking about, who our guests will be, etc. But we can't promise that because these are pretty quick developments. I mean, just amazing stuff is happening here. For those of you who didn't know, what you're watching right now when you're watching us is the demise of a democracy that's taking place in 6 weeks. So keep your eyes on what's going on. Come back and watch us. Spread the news around about us. Make sure that you get your friends to come and watch our episodes. They can watch them taped. They don't have to watch it when it comes out. So stay with us. Ron, thank you very much.
Hey, Moshe, thank you. And it was an interesting ride. And
Yeah, absolutely.
we'll keep it up.
Okay, so I would like to thank everybody now, and what we're going to do is bring this up. And we are on the Solha channel on Facebook. You could be watching, on YouTube. You could be watching this on Facebook or LinkedIn. We're going to be sending links to various platforms, and we hope to have you with us in the upcoming episodes or installments, however you want to call them. Thank you very much. Litraot, goodbye, ila laka, from the Western Galilee.